I don't know why, but you are watching the Madness Comic Network. Are you mental?
On a catwalk, Teresa struts her stuff, but the fame and attention just isn't enough. When the darkness descends, turning day to night, she takes to the skies with a blinding light. She's a sight to behold, sexy and powerful, brazen and bold. She's turning up for the fight, rooting out evil and shining so bright.
Years in shadows, hiding away. A hero awaits to emerge into day. His legacy lives in his son by his side. They're chasing a truth that can no longer hide. Captain Thunder and Blue Bolt, this is where the storm begins. Fighting unfairness and clearing his name. Lightning strikes and justice wins.
And greetings, everybody. I am RJ Carter, Senior Managing Editor at CriticalBlast.com, myopic proofreader for Critical Blast Publishing, Chief Envelope Licker for Critical Blast Logistics, and yes, I will help you with your crowdfunder data with Critical Blast Consulting, putting my 35 years of IT database experience to work for you. Tonight, it's not night, it's afternoon. This is different. We're not at our usual time. So if you're here, you're one of the lucky ones. You're first in line because we have a very special program tonight because we have none other than Dennis Maloney with us here. but while that is definitely a treat, I love talking with Dennis. You're all here, I'm sure, to speak with the living legend. You know him, you love him from the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, the Good Age of comics, Mr. Roy Thomas. Roy, welcome to the show, sir.
Good age? Is that what they call it now?
That's what I'm calling it. It was the best age of comics.
Hi. Yeah. Glad to be here. I haven't seen Dennis in a long time.
Not since
We've been associated since, what was it, 1986, right after we got, I think it was first, we got together about 40 years ago there.
Yeah, it was at the CAPS where they honored you at the Comic Art Professional Society. That was the last time I saw you.
No, I meant the first time.
Oh, the first time.
That was back in the mid-'80s, by the
86.
time my DC contract was ending. And
Yeah,
Alter Ego going there.
we did communicate before then, but we'd never met face to
Yeah,
face.
right.
until-
Through Mike Frieder, my then agent.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, nice to be on here. That's great. I didn't know Captain Thunder and Blue Bolt had their own animated song and everything. You know, that's right up there with that Spider-Man song that Gary Friedrich and I wrote. You know?
It still hurts me, by the way, a little bit when somebody says 40 years ago back in the 80s. Those two phrases don't work for me. They collide in my head.
Yeah, well, I was already in my 40s, you know. So,
But you know, there's so many comics that I and everybody else read had your name attached to them, and then had you know Dan's name attached to them as well. I don't know when you got into comics. I don't know what your gateway drug was. Do you recall the first comic book that hooked you?
You mean when I was a kid?
Well, sure. Unless you read them later. Some people do.
No, oh no, I don't know which one I saw first. My mother always told me that I spotted one on the. They didn't have racks in those days. There were still shelves in a drugstore in my hometown of Jackson, Missouri. Probably a Superman or Batman, and or some other superhero like that, and said, I want that or something, and she scraped up a dime and got it for me, and that was sort of the start of it. I don't remember what the oldest comic I ever remember really particularly having and holding and looking at before I could read would have been, I think, Green Lantern number 16. I traced back from about had early 45, so I would have been 4 years old. Yeah.
Again, the good stuff.
About the same age I was.
I don't know if it was good. It was there, a great character. I mean, the material might not have been so good, but the concepts were so good that they grabbed me. And I didn't have the 4-year-old kid. I didn't have the criterion to know if the art was good or the writing, certainly at that stage, was good. But I just knew that there was something about this approach, these guys in these colorful costumes and these strange powers and things that grabbed me. Somebody else would have been attracted to a Western or, maybe a science fiction story or a funny animal. I went for the superheroes. And while I branched out later, I never gave up on that particular genre.
It was about the same age I was when I found my brother's stash of comic books, and I was fascinated by them. So same kind of story.
Well,
I had I think it was a Superman 100.
Comics, they would have been later. I mean, they would. Yours a little later than
mine would have been. The first one I ever remember reading was Action Comics number 259. But my brother had a whole bunch of them there. He also had Mad magazines, which I found hilarious. I was 2 years old. They were just great.
That's the new stuff to me,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, I didn't get hooked until Superman 181.
Pardon?
I didn't get hooked until Superman 181. I grew up in Sparta, Illinois, so you know where I got my comics from.
Yeah, right out of the gate there, huh? You probably sneaked in and grabbed them off the printing press. Funny thing is, although I didn't live that far away, maybe 100 miles, I've never been to Sparta, Illinois in my life. Closest I ever came was probably seeing Heat of the Night, which was filmed there, only calling it Sparta, Mississippi. Yeah. But I've never been to, I always sort of wanted to go there. And Gary Friedrich's, my late friend Gary Friedrich, who co-created Ghost Rider and stuff like that, I think it's his sister-in-law or something. She worked there. I've got an interview with her. I've got to find a way to publish soon, because I was always fascinated by what went on at that plant, which at one time published most of the major, comics, was publishing all that stuff. But I never got a chance to go there. Once or twice, I think Saul Brodsky or somebody made a trip there, for Marvel, but I never got a chance to, go with them. It would have been kind of funny. I'd been flying to make a trip, and I've ended up 100 miles from where I grew up, if I was going backwards. But Sparta, Illinois. That was a famous name back in those days, if you knew anything about comics.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I get stacks from people who, friends of my dad who would work there. They just brought home print overruns like they were day-old donuts at the bakery.
Right. People saved that. They had a little money, but they probably just tossed them away. When you get it free, you don't value it. You throw it away.
Oh, I know a guy who didn't collected some of the comics, but what he collected were the brass printing plates used to make the covers, the offset print covers. He's just got stacks of this metal in his garage, and I don't know anybody else who collects that, but it was intriguing to look at and see the artwork on it.
Dick Giordano told me they used to keep a lot of the printing plates stacked up in the hallways at Charlton up in Derby, Connecticut, and so forth. And one day he ran to the publisher and asked, why do you have all this stuff hanging up? You can't use them. And they said, well, we're waiting for the price of metal to go up or something. He says that's what he knew, that they were not primarily in the publishing business.
Yes.
Excuse me, I'm getting over the remnants of a little cold or something I caught up in a convention near Boston about a week ago or so, and I don't want to end up sneezing, on here.
Yeah. Roy, one of the things that always stood out to me when I was reading your books was the deep lore. You could always count on that. One of the books that jumps out to me almost immediately was when you would do Justice Society. In fact, the 4-issue America versus the Justice Society, with Batman's diary being the core piece of the court case.
My wife's idea. She's the one that came up with the Hitler's diary was real big at that time. Remember Hitler's diary for a couple of months before it was exposed as a hoax? So she came up with the idea of a Batman diary that would sort of set the story off. I have a very bright wife, and she came up with a lot of ideas. She just never liked to really write them down particularly. She'd be happy to give them to me.
So basically, Dan equates Batman with Hitler?
Well, just for a starting point. The thing was that he was dead, So, because he'd been killed off by, and Paul Levitz back in the stories in All-Star Comics. So that was a convenient thing. If somebody else had died, it might have been the Green Lantern diaries. But Batman, being such a big character, was a natural way to do something with him and still not have to use that character, I was never that interested in writing Batman with the characters because he couldn't do anything. Batman, after I grew to be about 10 or so, he was never a very interesting character to be. He looked great, and all that, but he just never. Yet his stories were better written than the average, but he just never was a character of great interest to me after about.
Well, I think we can give Bill Finger a lot of credit for how interesting those Batman stories were.
Yeah, one of the great regrets of my life is I spent an evening with Bill Finger in the company of Jerry Bales, Dave Kaler, and a couple other people the night before the start of the 1965 comic convention, after I'd been in New York about 4 or 6 weeks. And I was down in his apartment near Greenwich Village. But I was so into my new job. I had just started at Marvel a couple of weeks earlier, and in the whole industry about a couple of weeks earlier than that. And, so I didn't really, pay as much attention. But I remember, seeing this. He had the piece of paper where he had scribbled the name Robin and various other names as a possibility for, the kid sidekick of Batman and stuff. And I knew that he had co-created Batman at that stage, or whatever he was allowed to be. That he was the original writer anyway. And I knew about Green Lantern, but at that time I was just so into the new career that the part of my brain that is Roy Thomas comics historian that had been very active a few months earlier doing Alter Ego and things like this, and for several years in comics fandom that came back out later in the last 20 or so years, had just kind of gone to sleep for 2 or 3 decades and everything.
It woke up pretty quickly.
But Jerry Bales took care of it. It was really nice. Unfortunately, I only met him one other time. He dropped by sometime in the early 70s, not too long before he died, in the last couple of years of his life. I guess he had an appointment with Stan or something, because I might have been editor-in-chief or next thing to it when he did, but somehow I never saw him that day except to say hello when he came in, and then he was gone, because I knew if he had come to me, I'd have given him work. We had those black and white books starting and so forth, and I would have found a way to give Bill Finger some work. I never did quite hear whether he was looking for work, but I can't imagine he wasn't, and everything. And so I sort of feel like he was sort of a missed, opportunity in my life to get to know a little bit better, because he was certainly a major figure in the field.
I have a question for you, Roy. Getting back to Robin, is it true, the story I've heard, that the name was actually inspired by Jerry Robinson? Or is that a myth?
I have no idea. Jerry Robinson would probably have said that it was. I don't know. The actual story, of course, that I hear the most often was always that it was from Robin Hood, and that's never made much sense to me. I mean, a little bit, but you got a character called the Batman. What's a bat? A winged creature that flies around. And you got a boy, and he's called Robin. Is he really named after Robin Hood, or the fact that a robin is a bird? I mean, at least it's got, nobody ever mentions that the fact, and he's red-breasted. He's got, he's named after a goddamn bird. He doesn't need Robin Hood or Jerry Robinson's name. He could have been called something else. I remember when I was a kid, I didn't like Robin much, and I once tried drawing a Batman story myself at age of 9 or 10, and I made up, I had Batman and Raven. I thought that was, I think they might have used that later on in some way, but I always thought that was a better name for Robin was a little, nothing.
Should have called him just Target Boy.
Yeah, Target Boy, right. I never liked Robin because, who's interested in a kid's sidekick? I never liked those. I was like Stan in that regard. I didn't want to be Robin. I wanted to be Batman. I didn't want to be Toro. I wanted to be the Human Torch,
I found Robin to be rather annoying when I was reading the books. I mean,
well, they make it even less. If superhero comics can be made less realistic. There's nothing does that any better than running around with some kid where you'd probably get thrown in jail for endangerment. The only thing worse than Robin and Bucky was Catman and Kitten, where you got this guy running around. He's got this young girl running around with her, endangering her, and everything. I don't know.
What about the black cat and her little kid's boy sidekick? Remember that?
Yeah, that I don't know. It was all just attempts to, sell books and not be quite as imitative of Robin, I suppose, but they were all kind of nutty.
And yet we have Captain Thunder and Blue Bolt.
Yeah, but Blue Bolt is, he's not a kid sidekick type. What is he? He's already has 16, 17, 18. I mean, he's not.
He said he was 16.
Yeah,
at the beginning of the series.
Yeah, but they made Robin in the early days look like he was supposed to be about 10 or 12. He seemed like he was a real young kid. Like he wasn't any teenager in the early days.
Yeah.
Eventually, maybe they changed, but I don't think he was supposed to even be a teenager by then. Certainly nothing more than 12 or 13. But that's just too young, But anyway, who cares about Robin? They killed about 5 of them off by now. Let him stay dead. Batman was better as a loner, Anyway,
I've always thought so.
Batman and Robin's how I met my wife. So because I was online in the pre-internet days, and that's back when it was like a CB handle to get online and call up the bulletin board, and I just used Batman because no one grabbed it. And my wife had the same name as the Robin from the Dark Knight Returns, so we had a connection there, and we finally got married. But not over Batman and Robin.
Yeah, well, it's a good thing it wasn't Bucky. You could end up with.
Yes.
Anyway,
be married to the Winter Soldier now.
Right.
Well, maybe we should segue into Captain Thunder and Blue Bolt at this point.
No,
what do you think?
Yes,
I'm not against it.
So
was that our first project, Dennis? We did. I think was that the first thing we did together.
That's the first thing we did together. Yes,
because Alter was for first originally.
Yes.
So, Mike Friedrich helped us get together. Seems like it might have been at our place in San Pedro at some stage.
It was at your place in San Pedro. I came there and we sat down, you and me and Mike and Dan and Del Barris.
Yeah, that's not true though, in a way, because when I had met Dan and lived there for a while earlier, it had been San Pedro. But while we lived for about 3 or 4 years up in Hollywood, they moved the boundaries and everything, because that part of San Pedro decided they wanted to be fancier and became Rancho Palos Verdes. It was the same building, same lower middle class neighborhood, but now it was. But when you saw it was Rancho Palos Verdes. Although to a lot of people it's still San Pedro, it just had changed boundaries, so it was technically in a different town then. Yeah, I thought I remembered that.
Okay,
Adele was there.
Changed the district boundary for the city of Los Angeles.
Yeah. And Del was there too. Huh? I don't remember Del Barris very well. I probably just been in that one time. That's why I don't recall. But I know he designed the character, did a good job of it too. But he just didn't seem to stick around long or whatever. But anyway, how do you want to take this order to go over anything?
Well, what I'd like to know is how you go into the creative process on purpose. I mean, I understand if you're like just driving along and an idea says, "Hey, it'd be cool. A guy who flies with lightning bolts coming out his feet." But when you're actually like meeting to put together a comic like Captain Thunder and Blue Bolt, and it's like a conclave. It's like, okay, what ideas do we have? And now you're like really trying to come up with something.
Well, you just have to make sure that it's an idea that you have some faith in, because it's going to be your money and somebody else's money. That's my money in terms of time. Nobody's going to, pay. It's one thing to write a Captain America story. It's another thing to make up your own, character and so forth. You're thinking of the publisher and everything, and you've got more of a real investment. And I thought it was a fairly good idea. I don't recall everything about the origin of the character. I think.
I will say that you started from the concept of wanting to do a father and son superhero team.
That came real early, and I don't know if that was my concept or Dan and me working together, because
I think it was Dan. I think it was Dan who
I
actually.
wouldn't be surprised. She came up with it's interesting because later on, after when I sent the first issue or two to my then agent Dan Oster, he's a film producer now, and he said I'd sent him other comics before. He says this is the this is my favorite of all of your comics writing, and Dan had done a lot more of the writing, and I don't mean that she wrote it and I didn't, but I mean she did. She actually worked on the dialogue which she had done a lot in the DC comics too. But in this one, she had a very strong hand in the characterization and so forth. And and we worked on it very much together. And even though I don't remember all the details and everything, it was very much a collaboration. And I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't Dan. She had the idea for Arak, Son of Thunder was basically her idea at DC, the idea of the Indian discovering America. I mean, discovering Europe rather than Europeans discovering America. That was kind of a nice switch on things. But I think the reason why she thought of these things was because she wasn't a comics fan. She wasn't blinded by anything that had been happening in comics or couldn't happen in comics, or that there was some reason why something shouldn't happen in comics. At that time, she was, still fairly new to it. She didn't pay much attention to them when she wasn't working on them herself. So therefore, she would just come up with anything. And my whole, not my whole, but part of my job was to sort of be the filter, because when you come up with a whole mess of ideas, some of them are going to be, well, they've already been done, but you don't know it, or they've been done, or this is a bad idea and we know it for this reason or that reason. You could still be wrong, but you'd have that opinion. But the nice thing is when you get somebody sometimes with a fresh perspective, they come in, they have an idea that, you wouldn't think of maybe, that you might yourself. And so I think that, I was sort of fooling around with stuff and Dan made the suggestion. It sounded, good to me. The father and son idea sounded pretty good. That hadn't really been done much. I mean, there were little things. There was back in Prize Comics, back in the 40s, they had this team of twins. I don't remember the name, Yank and Doodle.
That sounds right.
In a comic called Prize Comics, they were, like you couldn't tell them apart. They were twins and, wore little star-spangledy costumes. But they had their father, and he took over. There had been a character called the Black Owl, who was sort of a Batman type, who was the lead thing for a while. Simon Kirby, or at least Kirby did one or two of them. But somehow they killed him off, and they had the father of Yank and Doodle become the new Black Owl. So this feature became Yank and Doodle with the Black Owl. The father became a supporting character in his son's comic strip. And there were, one or two things like that, but not very much, and I thought, well, this would be kind of interesting. We'd explore that father and son kind of relationship and everything. So, we plotted out this story, in which the father had a cloud over his head and, they're estranged with the son, hadn't seen him in all these years. It had a lot of the classical, I think, qualities of a story of, father and son who've been estranged for years due to various circumstances, have to get to know each other, and they're, prejudiced against each other. And the mother doesn't like the father anymore, and, things like that. And we just tried to take that and put superhero trappings on it and see where it led us. And it led us in some, interesting places. It never, I don't think we got a chance to quite develop it the way we would have, but we did some nice issues with it. And we had some nice art by Dell first, and then E.R. Cruz did a number of issues in a row. That was very nice.
With a few other help from some other people as well.
Oh, yeah.
Some other issues.
Yeah. Benito Gallejo did one fairly recently.
Yes.
And as you know, it was optioned for a movie once. I was proud of that. I can't remember the name of the director or producer who did it. It was the guy who did what was that mountain movie back in the day.
I don't remember
his name, Jeremy Jones or something like. Anyway, but this guy,
Jeremiah Jones. Jeremiah Jones.
It might have been. Yeah, that might have been the name. Yeah, he optioned it, and everything. I mean, it wasn't a big option. It was like $10,000. Dan and I took half and split and gave the rest, even though we had the copyright. We gave the rest to Dennis and the artist, because we just wanted to control the thing so we could kind of have central control, but we didn't really want all the money. And the guy, he kept it for years. For some reason, this guy, whose name just doesn't occur to me, I'd recognize if I heard. I'd get it in multiple choice, as I always say. But he kept it off and on. I don't think he ever actually technically renewed with any money, but he kept it, saying that he somehow thought there was something else there that he was going to unlock and somehow discover some new secret thing about it that would make it just work for a movie. And I said, well, you've got a classic father and son story, only they're superheroes. I said, it seems like that ought to, you could embellish that and do different things with it, but it seems like that ought to be a good enough starting point for a movie. But somehow he was looking for some other magical ingredient that he never found, so he eventually let it last. But I was proud of the fact that it was optioned anyway. And it's a shame. It would have made a good movie. Still would, of course.
I saw so many young wards, I guess, growing up reading comics that it never really occurred to me that there just weren't any father and son. The only other one I can think of is a very new one. Michael Oden's The Embrace, where it's and it's a weird father and son one because the son is dead, but he's a young boy and he comes back and tries to calm his grieving father. His father wants justice, and the son's like, "Well, okay, let's do that." And he wears this costume, and the costume is the ghost of his son, sort of like a Venom symbiote.
That's both imaginative and sick at the same time.
Yeah, I gotta say, there was also briefly during the Mighty Comics stuff that Jerry Siegel was working on. There were two Shields, right? The father and
then the one based on the one that Kirby had done, that Double Life of Private Straw.
What I was going to say is the original Shield's son took over the role. When the original Shield got turned into stone.
Yeah, there may have even been one or two others, the Golden Age, but they weren't rare. They weren't common. Usually they were wards, whatever that meant, Yeah. So they weren't really relatives, and I think that started out with. Well, the funny thing is, I think Robin and was it Toro? They came out or Bucky, one of them came out within a few months of each other. They're very close together, but they all ended up being wards. Or Toro was just somebody that Torch picked up at a circus, basically. He flew by, the guy burst into flame. He said, "Okay, we're kindred souls." They fly off together. That's about as close as Carl Burgess wanted to come to an origin.
Let's find a little kid and light him on fire. That was a good idea.
Yeah. There may have been one or two others, but anyway, we knew it hadn't been dealt with, certainly not by any major characters or in any other major way. Dennis liked the idea, and Dell did a great job with the costumes and everything. And, with the red and the yellow one, and then the more blue motif for the other.
And the periods as well. I mean, the costume from Captain Thunder has a 50s or 60s kind of feel to it, and the Blue Bolt costume feels more, 80s and 90s. So
that could be. Of course, it was. Yeah, it probably was. Yeah, I hadn't really even thought about it that much, but you're probably right. And one of my main contributions at the start was the names. And I was, I wanted to take the name Captain Thunder because I felt DC had, I never totally forgave DC for pursuing, the original Captain Marvel, and everything, and as a fan and everything. So, and I felt that they the idea that they would somehow also have the rights at some stage because they had done one story to a guy called Captain Thunder, that they should have the rights to that name. I just felt it just wasn't right for DC to have the rights to the name Captain Thunder. They didn't deserve it. They couldn't use Captain Marvel. They didn't deserve Captain Thunder. So, I was kind of annoyed with them too. I had just sort of left their full-time employ. I was still doing a little work for them. So I loved the name Captain Thunder. So I just took it, and, made no apologies for it. Never have felt any need to. A couple of people were mad about it, but I had people get mad at me before. It's never bothered me too much. And the other name was even weird, was, Blue Bolt. It just seemed a natural if you're going to, and everything. I don't think I don't know if we had talked about color at that time, but still Blue Bolt. That was a wonderful name, of course, coming from the old Joe Simon character. I kept, I don't know, Dennis, you probably know this, but over the years, I got any number of comments at conventions, maybe even on a phone call once or twice, but several times at conventions when he would be there and we'd be talking and so forth. And he'd bring up Blue Bolt. It was always a sore point with him. I said, Joe, you haven't done Blue Bolt since, 1940 or something? You did a couple of 7 or 8, 9 stories. You left this character. You've never done him since. It's obviously public domain. I'm not even using your character. I'm just using the name. I said I would never try to swipe the character itself, but it's just an homage type name. And he was always sort of claiming like he had some sort of legal rights, and someday he was half good natured and half not. Take me to court on it.
He was ribbing you.
I didn't think he was going to win that one, and I didn't think he probably ever would. So we stayed in on good terms, really. But I said I'm sorry, I didn't think you'd care, because it had been, by that stage it had been something like over 40 years, since he had last done anything with Blue Bolt. I said it was just an homage. I said I got to admit I could have made up a different name for both of them, but being the way I am, the idea of having a couple of old comic book names attached to these characters just appealed to me.
It was great. And Blue Bolt, in fact, I don't know how much you want to get into this, but it was because of Blue Bolt that we felt a need to do this archive edition.
Yes. Well.
To protect it. Yeah. Well, you can. I don't know much about it. You can say what you want to. I don't know. But go ahead.
Well, it was because, in large measure, that someone drew your attention to the fact that Marvel was introducing a character named Blue Bolt.
It was actually Joe Simon's grandson, I think, who I know slightly, called it. He and his father. They called me on a call and asked me if I knew about it. I knew nothing.
I knew nothing about it either.
Yeah, and I contacted Marvel, and I don't. All I said was, I didn't know if they were aware of the fact that not only these characters exist, but that we've advertised. It wasn't like I'm coming out with left field. We already had advertised in the book how we were going to be reprinting these stories. It had already come out in the recent months. We'd had two or three couple of ads in Alter Ego and so forth. And I have to say, I'm assuming they're good as their word. I haven't heard from them since, that they got back to me, rather shortly. I mean, they go into a lot of detail, but said that after the second or third issue, something like that, they were going to change the name of the character in some way or other. And that's, because the character itself was, again, nothing like either the original Blue Bolt or our Blue Bolt. It was just that name. And I thought, Marvel's got Black Bolt. How many bolts do they need,
Maybe someone knows, because that was a while ago. It may be that other name, certainly that other name would be out there. Maybe someone could advise us as to what name they
I don't see too many new comics anymore. There's some stores I just don't keep up. I'm sort of interested. I wanted to know about it. I thought if I'd see a copy, I'd have even bought copies of those just to see what they did. No problem with the concept. It seemed like he's some kind of jerk character, but just the idea of the name, it was only the name, and they didn't need the name. So why have that dispute out there? First of all, it would complicate their ever using, say, in a film or something, right? Because because they'd have to look and think, here's somebody else has another claim on that name. So it probably made sense for all concerned, since it meant so little to them.
I'm curious, because I did suggest a name that you passed along to them.
I think I did pass it along. Yeah, I think.
But you didn't tell them where it came from. Hold on. There's a note here.
Yeah.
There's a Blue Bolt in the current volume of West Coast Avengers, so that must be the lead time. They haven't had time to change it yet.
Yeah, because it's only about the third or so issue they claimed they were going to change it. Now, if they don't, I don't know. I'll see. I'll try to. Now that you reminded me, I think we'll both try to check on this soon and see if they did it. I did. Maybe, or I don't know. Maybe they're still mad at me over something about Wolverine, and something. They won't do it. I don't know.
Well, one of the things about the name that stood out to me was that you didn't just stick it to DC with Captain Thunder. You kind of stuck it to him with Blue Bolt as well, because I remember I watched all the little shorts from Filmation, Lou Scheimer's company, when they were doing the DC Hero 5-minute cartoons, and one of the ones you would rarely see was the Flash and Kid Flash, and the villain was another speedster named Blue Bolt.
Was it made up for TV or something?
Yeah,
it was made up for TV, but it was in the DC universe of characters. Yeah. So it was.
Well, I was one of the first people to do that kind of thing, taking these old names from old characters and making new characters out of them, like Yellow Jacket and things like that. But as other people came along and they also had access to the same information I did, especially as more and more reprinting was being done, and the comic museums, digital comic museum, and so forth, were online where you could check things out. More and more people were going to, become aware of these things. So they would do some of the same, kinds of things. So I can't expect to have, I didn't expect to have a monopoly on that kind of taking over names. I just was one of the people that did it first because it was a particular interest of mine, and I've been around a longer time than most.
But the difference is that your Blue Bolt was active. Right? Copies were being sold. The trademark was still out there.
Yeah.
Right? So Marvel was in fact stepping on an existing trademark.
Yeah.
I've always had. I should say that I've always been on good terms with Marvel. Right.
Yeah.
We came to a nice accommodation regarding their use of the Champions trademark, and we both ended up happy. So
it's probably an accident it's usually the writers, the writers get all, they get something. I include myself, they get all excited about something, and just never occurs to us that maybe there's any sane reason, just for business or whatever, not to do something. We just go ahead and do it. It's hard for me to believe that somebody around Marvel didn't know that Blue Bolt was the old original character, but they might be unaware of our character because it hasn't been out there too much a while. But once I could explain to Marvel that it was being, we had solicited new material and reprints of material and so forth, and had another issue in the works, which we do, to come out and everything. That this would just create kind of confusion in the marketplace. Marvel doesn't need that, especially over a name that means nothing to them at that point. But it was still nice. And then they could have tried to stomp on us. And if they actually withdraw it, I feel that's a very nice thing for them to have done. And whenever I find out they've actually done it, I'll write them a nice thank you note just to make sure they haven't forgotten. It's a big corporation. Who knows? But no, I don't think anybody was ever after us. They were just looking for names. I guess Brown Bolt just doesn't have any appeal to anybody,
Brown Bolt sounds so.
What was the name? What was the name that you suggested? It was good. I don't recall.
Well,
maybe you don't want to repeat it.
I can say it because if they changed it, it's already in production. Whatever name they chose, I thought it would be a good name for the kind of asshole character that they were introducing to start calling himself the Azure Avenger.
Oh, the Azure Avenger, yeah.
Right, because that way he would tweak all the other Avengers, right?
It was a good name, yeah, right.
The government forced him on the Avengers, and he said, well, I'm the Azure Avenger now. That would just be a good way to get under their skin.
It was a good idea, and I felt if you could never, help solve a problem a little extra, and so, I passed it on to him. But we'll see what happens. But mostly we're interested in our possibilities. Pardon me?
It would open up good plot possibilities if they actually use
their problem. We got our own problems.
Yeah, true. Okay. We
were very happy to help solve this problem. By collecting the Captain Thunder Blue Books, and Dennis has one. Mine is back in my old place. I'm still moving, but that's a brick. That's a big hardcover.
Because it's a hardcover and the paper's kind of thick. Dennis's is lost in the mail. I sent him. I had a couple of copies. He asked me to. Dan and I autographed one and sent it, went lost in the mail, and I got to take one of my other copies. I haven't got around to mailing yet, but I got to send it.
That's okay. Like I said, I'll send you a replacement copy for that too.
I'll send it. I just haven't been up to the post office one day, and when I did it such short notice. I didn't have time to get it ready because Dan was there. I wanted her to make sure she had signed it too. But I've got an extra copy. I just needed the other copy that had the trademarks on it and everything. And I got that one. That was my main thing.
Yeah, we goofed up a little bit. That's going to be a rare issue. There are several copies out there that don't have trademark.
Yeah, but it's relatively rare. I haven't heard anything. It was it's a nice looking. Are you, RJ? You're connected to Critical Blast, right?
I am Critical Blast.
You're Critical Blast. Well, that's a nice package. That's a nice package.
Well, thank you. My partner, my creative director George Peter Gatsis, did a lot of work on making all that look pretty, and I'd be lost without him. He's supposed to be here, but he's sleeping. He worked all night doing some lettering for some more projects we got, and he's catching up on Z's.
Well, let me just say also that archive contains every appearance of Captain Thunder and Blue Bolt that has ever happened in the comic books, even down to a retailer promotional poster that they appeared on.
Yeah, it's nice to have that collected. Yeah,
it's basically the complete so far Captain Thunder and Blue Bolt.
But we got another one in the works, right?
We do. It's issue number 13. It's going to be a supersized issue to wrap up that initial storyline after all these years. God, I hope we can get to it soon. It's for me, it's a matter of resources. I just don't have huge
Sure.
resources. I'm not Marvel or DC.
None of us are.
Yeah. So
It's a great looking book. I mean, it's a Heroic Publishing book, so it's still Heroic's imprint, obviously, Critical Blast imprint on the back, but it's out there with Flair. It's out there, it's going to be out there with She-Bat. Dennis is working with us to do a lot of stuff. Roy, we would love to work with you on more of your own creator-owned materials, but I know you've got two Marvel Publishing.
I'm 84 and a half now. I haven't got a lot of. I could do it if I get. The problem is, 25 years ago. I guess it was 25 years ago. I got back doing Alter Ego as a magazine, and I like doing it. I still enjoy doing it, but the problem is, it takes up so damn much time for very little return. I enjoy doing it, but I lose money. I mean, I don't lose money, but I mean, it's one of the least productive uses of my time I could think of, probably, as my wife, always reminds me. She says, you make 35 cents an hour, she says, doing it. And I said, well, I'm not trying to make, money, with it, but I just enjoy it. I enjoy the history. And if anything happened that got in the way or something like this, after almost 200 issues, it wouldn't kill me to kill it. But I just kind of like going on. If I start getting really bored or I run out of material that I feel is worthwhile, I'll do it. But that doesn't leave me much time for writing. And I basically, all I was doing, I'm keeping my hand in by doing 3 strips, which are supposed to be weekly, but we don't come out with them more than a couple times a month, for Edgar Rice Burroughs' website. 2 different Tarzan strips, one adaptation of the novels. We're just starting Return of Tarzan as the 3rd book, because we worked Jungle Tales into the warp and woof of the Tarzan of the Apes thing. And
I love
a John Carter. Pardon?
I love Jungle Tales. I think that was maybe the best of the Tarzan books.
It had some nice stuff in there. I wanted to do all the Tarzan stuff in chronological order, so when it came to the right point, right before he met Jane, that's where we just plopped in a whole year or so worth of Jungle Tales, and then John Carter, and a couple of books have come out of that. One reprint of some of the early Tarzan of the Apes, and one of the new Tarzan strip I had done with originally with Tom Grinberg, and then later with Benito Gallejo, which sort of got him the job I think he has now, doing some Tarzan for Dynamite.
Oh, cool.
And
we did have somebody just send a note thanking you for bringing Conan to the comics.
Yes.
Because, it was good for all of us. It was good for Marvel, good for me, good for Barry Smith's career. It was even good for Arnold Schwarzenegger, because for a lot of people and so forth. The funny thing is, of all the things that I would have thought that I wouldn't end up doing anymore, the thing I seem to always end up coming back to without going around looking for it a lot is the Conan stuff. I don't know if you know that only 2 or 3 weeks ago, I had a new Conan story out from Heroic Signatures / Titan Comics, the combination of 2 that do the Conan material. They revived the title Savage Sword of Conan as a black and white magazine like the old one, and I just did it just came out 3 or 4 weeks ago, a 48-page Conan story, the longest thing I've done in an issue in a long, long time. And with this wonderful Spanish artist, Rob de la Torre, Torres, I have to look at it. But anyway, really good. He's like, it's like John, it's like a reincarnation of John Buscema in a lot of ways. And, but he's got his own style too, and he tells a wonderful story. He puts a lot of black and moody stuff, and I liked it so much that it was finished. He said he had an idea he'd like to do. So I said, look, I don't have time to plot. Why don't you just plot a story? You can get paid for the plot. I'll just dialogue it. So now I have a second assignment. My wife says she thought I was done with all that stuff, and here I am I'm doing a second 48-page Conan story. I said, yeah.
Let me just say that I always thought that your take on Conan was the best of that I've ever seen.
Well, I sort of agree with you there. Thank you. I don't think in comics anybody ever did it any better, but there have been a number of people who did it well. I mean,
yes, that is true.
I can't. Compare. They've got some good stuff coming out. Pardon me?
We use the black and white Savage Sword of Conan run as a as a template, so to speak, for one of the books that we published, which is The Atlantean from Randy Zimmerman and Russ Leach. They're doing the Cull series from like the very beginning. So they did, the Shadow Kingdom first as a graphic novel, and then launched that into the Atlantean. And everyone basically looks at it, says, hey, this is an A4 magazine sized book, black and white art. It's very Buscema-esque.
So this is basically doing, since the stories, I guess, are public domain, you just do it as long as you don't call it King Cull, you're okay. Is that?
I guess. I'm hands off on that area. The first
story
is public domain.
The Conan story. I've seen books called The Sumerian and stuff like that too. Where they adapt the Conan stories. They just can't say Conan on the cover. That's all right. If the stories are public domain, then they're public domain. I don't know.
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to trap you anything. I don't really know, because it's been a long time. Things that were public domain and that were copyrighted at one time, now 40, 50 years later, maybe they're not. I mean, we once at Marvel had to stop and swallow a whole Oz book I had already written and had been drawn and everything else, because the copyright hadn't run out on the third book, Oz with Oz. A few years later it did. So now I'm sitting around with copies of this never published, like 60 or 70 page story, that was all done, but it could never be published, I mean, a few pages are missing now, but, public domain, makes a lot of difference, but, Cull would be nice. Cull was a character I always thought, would be fun to take and start from the beginning. If I were doing it, I'd start with him as the, with the stuff like the Exile of Atlantis, the stories when he was the young kid on Atlantis, and take a long time to get to the Shadow Kingdom. But, there's all sorts of different ways to approach that, a character like
Absolutely,
that.
Yeah. So,
but anyway, I'm sort of back in the Conan business, and between that and trying to get my the first volume, which sounds ridiculous itself to say the first volume of my autobiography, as if it deserves more than one or even one, is to come out by the end of the year. I mean, it's sort of I guess if I noticed, I would say it was overextended, for a person of my age and everything.
We should mention the fact that Ron Harris has, in fact, finished the artwork for an issue of the Alter Ego superhero book, which I still need to get colored. And he also wrote it, and I need to do the lettering for it. But it shouldn't be too much longer before that comes out. Yeah. And we're planning for a total of 3 new issues, which will bring 8 altogether for the series.
Right. I'm hoping maybe I can get back and write. I was supposed to, write them all, and I had come up with the general concept, just, and so forth. And then, but I just felt like, I just felt a little cramped. I wasn't going to be able to do it all. Ron had written some comics, so I felt, well, give him the shot, give him a chance, make some extra money and see what he can do with it and so forth. Maybe I'll get a chance to write one of the other ones. This is the funny animal one. We had the superhero takeoffs for a while. We had a crime issue, and we're sort of going through all the various genres as they came out. There's got to be a romance issue, because romance came in the late 40s, and there'll be a horror issue and things like that. Go through all the various. I really love that concept. That was something that I remember there were a couple of producers in Hollywood really trying to make a series, half real life, half animation out of that at one time, and so forth. And there was back in 2000, I remember I met a producer who at the time worked for some major studio, and since then he went to another one, but I haven't heard from him in several years. But he was wanting to do the Alter Ego series. He said he told his wife on his honeymoon a year or two earlier, one of his great desires was to make a movie out of Alter Ego. And I said, well, good luck. I don't know if it's the paperwork is too complicated, because maybe the contracts weren't clear enough about where the rights went at the end, or if he just sobered up. I don't know what happened to him, but I was always proud of all those things. We have three series with you, really. Yeah. We got Captain Thunder and Blue Bolt, which is being reprinted in Newark and New. We got the Alter Ego with 3 issues in the works, spread out depending on Ron's schedule. And then there's
the 6th issue of Anthem, almost ready to go.
Right.
With me, it's always a resource issue, but the artwork's done, it's colored, and I just have a little bit of lettering left to do. And
Yeah.
then once we have the money to get it to press, it'll go to press.
Yeah.
We got an answer. I don't know if you saw it pop up as to what Marvel did. They dropped the blue. They're just calling him Bolt now.
Well, all right. That's fair enough.
That's fair. Yeah.
I don't think that's as good as Azure Avenger, but that's their business.
No. And he says they even mentioned in the dialogue that the name is temporary. So,
Oh, okay.
Well, bless their hearts. I thank Marvel. They could have, fought us on it and, and whatever, but they just saw it made more sense to change it. It meant very little to them. So,
Yeah, Marvel is basically nice people. Like I said, I've never had any.
Yeah, well, as they used to say on SNL, comic books have been very good to me, and everything. They're being nice to us now, so that's good. And we'll try to be nice to them in return. I had a good time with Marvel.
I just wanted to mention that I was one of those people that was absolutely enchanted by the alter ego concept when it came out, and I was a college kid at the time. But the fact that it was a kid who's finding his grandpa's old comics, and there's a mask insert that the premium that came with it, and he puts on the mask, and suddenly he's transported into the world of the comics.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always loved these kind of portal stories from Alice in Wonderland to Narnia to things like that.
Yeah. Well, it was a comic. There's a fair amount of the original Captain Marvel in it, in a way. A certain vague inspiration, and then of course there's a little bit of Captain 3D, right? Because he had the 3D glasses he put on. Well, that's the second time I swiped that because for Marvel I had 3D Man who had a similar experience, and it was just a chance to do something that I kind of wanted to do, to do all this and so forth. And I don't know, that's one at least I came up with myself. I can't blame that, off on Dan. That was one she helped me with some things here and there, but that was one that was mainly mine. With Captain Thunder, she had a big hand, but I like these concepts. I never, by the time I was, back to being a freelancer and everything, I don't know. I could have worked harder, I guess, at trying to make up more characters, but in some ways, I don't know. The bloom was off the rose, for me with comics after my experiences with Marvel and DC. Much as I loved their books and had, a lot of friends. I mean, and my good relationship with Stan and some people at DC and things of this sort. Somewhere or other, I just never had that fire in my belly again, to go out there and be doing 5 billion new things and working my tail off to see if I could get something or other to get rich, because I didn't care, that much. I was rich. I mean, we made that up in what, 1986, right?
Captain Thunder Blue Bolt, yeah.
Right. 4 or 5 years later, I mean, I moved to,
South Carolina, your animal farm.
Yeah, it wasn't not a place of wealth and glory or anything like that, but it's a 40-acre place with 2 houses and a swimming pool. I mean, that's a lot more than a poor kid from Missouri ever expected he's going to have anyway. Right? So what did I dream?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then in the 90s, about the same time I did that, even though the comics were kind of dried up, all of a sudden Marvel suddenly started doing all this reprinting and paying, DC too, but Marvel was doing some reprinting, and so the money came in, and by the time that and the movie money and different other things came in, it turned out, I found out I didn't really need to do anything. Somebody else. John, are you here? I can't imagine that. Just can you hang on just a second?
Sure, absolutely.
I can't imagine they've locked themselves out. Okay.
I think it's the lead giving me.
Okay, yeah, no, it's somebody bringing some greens for John and so forth. I thought maybe they had gone and locked themselves out. They fled over to the room because I had to, because if they talk, it gets in the way.
We should, I think, since the point of this is actually in a roundabout way to promote that Captain Thunder archive, we should tell people, Jay, how they can get hold of a copy of that.
By all means.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's a book, and when we sell books, they're in bookstores. You can go ask your Barnes and Noble to get it for you. You can go ask your I almost said B. Dalton, showing my age there. It's on Amazon. You can order it from Walmart, or the best way to do this is to go to criticalblast.com and click on our bookstore tab. You can buy it direct from the printer, and because we're cutting out that middleman, Roy actually gets a little bit more money. So, we want
I
that.
didn't know I got any money.
Yeah,
Do I? Okay.
when they sell.
Okay.
When they
As
sell,
long as Dennis and the artist get some, I'm not really looking for much. I just wanted to see.
Didn't we agree that 1/3 of that would go straight to you? I think we agreed that.
I suppose so. Yeah. All right. I never turn down money. I just not looking for it anymore. I got enough. So forth. But on the other hand, maybe I'll need it for the Wolverine Defense Fund. Who knows? But anyway. But no, it's a beautiful looking book. It's got a nice solid hardcover and
360 pages, I think.
Yeah. It's a big, thick book, and I think some of the writing there. We got different artists. Sometimes the art style changed a little bit. We have a lot of there's good artists, and E.R. Cruz had a nice long run in there, and he really knocked himself out on that. He passed away, didn't he, Cruz?
Yes, he passed away a while ago.
I had lost touch with him. Didn't Del Barris die recently?
No, Del's still kicking. He's actually he's working on a new sensational G-Girl story. Me.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. I didn't remember. I guess
he's semi-retired.
Yeah, well, that's what I am too officially, since I was 62, but it hasn't worked out.
And we have a mention of the All-Star Squadron.
Yeah, what?
The All-Star Squadron. Somebody is thanking you for that.
Oh well, thank you if you bought a copy. Thank heaven. I always say that two things. One is that was my favorite comic of all time to write, above Conan Avengers or anything. And because it combined the superheroes and the history, two of my great passions. And the other thing is that, I don't know what would have happened between me and DC, but basically there's a possibility that if it hadn't been for that damn Crisis on Infinite Earths, we might still, that the book wasn't selling that badly. Might have, all I needed was it on the right artist or a couple of things, but we might have kept going right to the middle. We'd be up to 300 or 400 issues by now. We might actually be up to 1943 in the war. You never know.
That would be great.
Yeah, that was a very long war.
Got George joining us now at the tail end of this conversation. Yeah. Hi, George.
Hi, guys. Sorry about that. The wife came home. She needed my attention. Who knew?
It happens. I know how that is. Roy was just complaining about how awful the book looks, and I was blaming you.
Yeah, I got to get the boys in the back to be better at it.
Nobody with a haircut like that should be put in charge of a book.
Oh, hold on a sec. How about that?
That's a little better.
Yeah.
Sorry for my throat. My throat's a little raw from this cold I've had, but
well, maybe. Is there anything else that you want to talk about specifically? This is your show. Why am I acting like host? This is your show.
I'm on here, mostly to promote Captain Thunder, because I want to see you, sell a few copies, make a few, bucks, for all of us, especially for you guys, and because you've been putting out the most work. All I had to do was say okay, and but it does me a favor, because I wanted to see it keep with its its trademark and things like that, and because I think they were basically good stories, and why shouldn't they be in print as opposed to a lot of the other stuff that's out there? It seemed to me that it should be.
Here.
Well, I do have a question about the industry in general, and I've made this statement on my shows before, completely unfounded. It's just a personal belief. But since you were there in the trenches the whole time, maybe you can give me some clarity on this. But
the view from the trenches isn't always that good. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is that I mentioned at the beginning of the show that you were from the good age of comics, the bronze and the silver and a lot of that.
I thought you were talking about today was the good age. I misunderstood.
Oh, well, see, that's my problem, is I'm not buying a lot of new comics anymore, because I keep feeling like the comics industry used to be producing comics from people who loved comics. Mm-hmm. And now I feel like they're being produced by an IP machine that's trying to keep trademarks alive. Mm. And I don't know what your take on the industry is. I know you still got friends in the publishing industry. You don't want to step on their feelings or anything like that. But
well, not really many people I know. I mean, I have good enough relationships with people at Marvel, but one or two more executives than anybody in the creative field. And the same thing is, I have very few contacts one way or the other in the comics field anymore. And I'm glad to see the field existing in this difficult time for publishing and all that. I'm glad to see DC and Marvel still existing. mostly what I know is would just be secondhand information, pieces here and there that I pick up from this person or that person that's read that reads comics, or that's seen one, or somebody passes on material from me from a news thing. But it does sound as if, a lot of the comics now are being written by people that, I don't know, really don't like what comics were. They want to, change them, and they want to. There used to be this thing, 20 years ago, and one or two people were particularly active in that the certain people would come on. It was like they would be, I'm going to tell you what should really have been done with this character, because everybody who ever wrote the character before was an idiot, And my feeling was that you should be very suspicious of anybody who says that, because the next person's going to say it about him too, and we all know that. But that was one thing. But nowadays, it seems like I get the impression that these people all just want to come in. That other thing I was talking about just now it's just like people's ego. They want to come in, and do their own thing. But now it seems like they almost want to dismantle the characters,
Deconstructionism.
Yeah, it's almost deconstructionism, right? To take it down, and and it goes beyond what even the other guys were doing. They're just take them and, I don't know, turn them into evil, turn them into women, turn them into ants. I don't know, whatever. But I don't know quite what was wrong. It's like, in some ways, I think it's a failure that they're really sure of how to tell a good story about the characters that exist. So all they can do is kind of deconstruct them, hoping they can find the story and tearing them apart, because they don't know how to build them up. And these characters are so good. Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, these characters, all they need are people come around who like them and want to tell good stories. You can put in a lot of controversial elements. You can have all the various, DEI and whatever kind of things you want in there. You can put all kinds of different elements in. I want to see diversity and everything else in comic books. But sometimes it seems like, they're trying to hit us over the head with everything, and trying to say that everything that was done with the character was not just by idiots, but that was just wrong-headed. I don't know. I haven't got much sympathy for that. But now only you guys or somebody else could tell me whether, it's all comics are like that, or it's just some of the ones I'm hearing about,
I do have a question. You just sparked something that's
is that the guy with the haircut? Okay.
That's been something that's been long brewing in my head, and I want to thank everyone here for the opportunity to ask Roy this. Roy, can you walk us through a day in the life of when you were doing Conan the Barbarian? We all understand how comic books are made. We all know the Marvel method, but can you actually tell us? I mean, the way you and the artist John were coming out with it every month, and it was bang on, epic. I mean, it just it was work on the level of from my point of view, inspirational, absolutely inspirational. And can you just walk us through this, give us an understanding of the day or the time?
Are you, George? Are you asking how Roy worked with John?
No. We all know how the Marvel method is. Tell us the life at Marvel. What was the life at Marvel? What was your communication? Was it phone calls? Was it faxes? What was
the problem is there was
stuff
no
we
way,
don't know,
because that even if you just count that first run, remember I came back to it for another decade, in the late 80s, 90s. But even if you just count that first decade from 1970 when we started it to 1980 when I left Marvel, I mean that there's a wide range, I mean, and the way that I worked with Barry, before he was Windsor, when I originally was working with him, he's living in England, and everything. I call him, but I had to pay for the phone call, which was very expensive in those days, because Marvel didn't believe in paying for phone calls, and I had to reach him fast sometime. But and then we got him back to the States, and then he promptly quit. But so, I mean, the way I worked with Barry, even that evolved, let alone then the way with John was simpler because John he just liked Conan. He had been the original choice to draw the characters, you probably know. And but we couldn't afford him because the publisher wanted to get his money back for the small royalty we were paying. So we had to get a cheaper artist. Well, as it turned out, there was nobody cheaper than Barry at that stage. He was getting a beginner's rate, like 20 a page, when John was getting maybe 40 or 50. So Barry got the assignment, which he made, perfectly made a touchdown with in very short order because of that. But then John got another shot at it, only about 2 or 3 years later with a couple of Gil Kane issues in between. But the way John worked and I worked was almost invariably the same, whether it was an adapted story by Howard or L. Sprague de Camp or somebody else, or whether it was an original story that I plotted out, is that I just sat down and either wrote a plot, or I sent him a copy of a story in a paperback or he already had one or something like that. I made Xeroxes or whatever it was, and maybe I marked it up a little, or I made a few comments, about leave this out or emphasize this or that. But otherwise, I just sent him stories and then let him draw them. Obviously, he had more leeway with the stories that I plotted that were new because they wouldn't have every detail. While a story by Howard or de Camp would have a lot more detail. It was, it was like a whole story, and all he had to do was read it and adjust it, But the thing is, Barry and I were different because Barry was from near the beginning not the very beginning, but he became more and more a contributor to the plot because, we got to trust each other. And his Conan was a little different. It wasn't exactly Robert E. Howard in certain ways, but it was very interesting on its own. So I figured, what the hell, let it go. And it worked out very well and kept increasing in sales and everything. So by the end, Barry and I were plotting some stories together. We plotted one of them in a hotel lobby, or the waiting room like of a hotel with a bunch of other guests around one evening in London in 1970 when my first wife Jeannie and I were over there visiting him and his then girlfriend while he was still stuck in England. And we were taking a Robert E. Howard very short story, and we were figuring out how to turn it into a big story. We turned one of the characters into a woman because there were no women in stories. At the end, Conan just slices off the head of this man-headed snake. Well, that was kind of dull by itself. It's not enough. So he came up with a whole several-page battle, that he's having with this snake and everything, and a couple of other things. And then Barry just did a wonderful version of it. And, and then when he came back, we plotted a couple of stories together. And, the first Red Sonja story was an adaptation of a Howard story. But then the next issue, which became his last color comic for Conan, was the Song of Red Sonja. And that was, it was my basic story, but we kind of co-plotted it together since, within my framework of what was happening. When John came in, John wasn't the guy that some guys wanted to plot with you. Like Barry got to like that. Gil Kane always wanted to do it. Neil Adams wanted to do it. Some other people like to do it. Even Rich Buckler sometimes. And when I worked with, George Perez on a couple of things, I'd let him kind of go, with things. It depended on the artist. With John, he didn't want to talk about it. He'd want to hear about it. He loved Conan. So all he wanted to do was just get the story and start drawing, because as little as he liked comic books, at least he liked drawing Conan better than he liked drawing anything else in comic books, because you didn't have to draw cars. He said he always hated drawing cars and modern cities. And he says, this is the kind of stuff I really want to do. He didn't even want to do Tarzan compared to Conan. He says, this is the kind of stuff, you can make it up. And he doesn't even have to do a realistic, medieval city, because it's a made up medieval city. So if nobody can say this isn't the way that looked, because it didn't ever look, And so he was just happy to take the stuff and draw, and he would do, at the worst, a good job. And of course, at his best, a magnificent job. And the only thing he didn't like was, he once in a while would complain. He says, I don't like these goddamn L. Sprague de Camp stories. He says, Robert E. Howard, he writes a good, gutsy story. You send this stuff by this de Camp guy, hasn't got any guts. So I said, I know that. I said, well, why are you sending it to me? He says, well, that was the official canon that was out there in the paperbacks. So I said, we're doing them all. We're doing Howard. We're doing de Camp. We're, the other people that write it. And so he'd do it, but he didn't like it, But he was paying attention, John. Old time.
I've got a question
I don't
for
know
you
what. Pardon me?
about the Tower of the Elephant in particular.
Yeah.
Barry did the original adaptation of that.
Yeah.
Did John just have a hankering to do it himself? Is that why you?
No, that was me.
Oh, that was you.
I wanted to make to do all the adaptations I could of everything. I adapted the Tower of the Elephant with Barry and in number 4. Then I had John readapt it because I wanted to see what he would do with
Okay.
more pages in Savage Sword, and so I doubt if he even looked at Barry's book, or if he did just for a second.
No, there was nothing in there
No,
aside from the basic plot that was
Yeah,
the same.
John.
Right? That's
I
why I
mean,
was curious about it, whether it was
I don't
John.
think John disliked Barry's work. It just Barry's work wouldn't have meant anything to John. I mean, John was on a different. Barry was a great artist in his own way, but John was on a different plane. Doing more realistic work. And then I adapted as in sort of like old time radio format for a record album. That was published, somewhere in that period. It took, I guess, that side of it, I don't know, ran 15 minutes or so. That was kind of nice. And then right before I left Marvel, I adapted it as I think I adapted near the end of the Conan comic strip. I think I adapted that about 4 times. I just wanted I liked that story so much. I just wanted to wring everything out of it. Every time I could find a new excuse to adapt it, I would do it all over again. And when I was advised story consultant of the first Conan movie, I made a couple suggestions from that story for the plot when he was and everything. I was glad to see he had that tower with that serpent in there. And I said he should call it the Tower of the Serpent and things like that. But that was just my favorite story, even though it has one impossible thing is I think it has Conan tossing up his rope to climb this tower. He indicates like the tower is 100, 150 feet. There's nobody can toss a rope that high,
He had a Conan ring.
Yeah, right. I mean, unless you got maybe an eagle carrying it up or something. But, Howard could just make you kind of believe it because he was such a magical storyteller. He kind of carried along. And if you're going to, that was a weakness of it. But it was so good otherwise, you just kind of overlooked that kind of thing, DeCamp, as somebody once said, was too sane to write a Conan story. Really.
That's a good way to put it. DeCamp was a good writer, but
he was a good writer.
His Conan just didn't feel right. Never felt right to me.
Yeah, which is funny because half the time those stories were Robert E. Howard stories that he did just some rewriting on, but still somehow never quite ended up being a real Howard story. No, there's only one real Conan, it's not me and it's not Schwarzenegger and it's not anybody else. It's Robert E. Howard, and it died when he shot himself in the head in 1936. But in the meantime, he left a nice legacy of little stories. Some of them are better than others, but a wonderful character and a wonderful world. And I'm just glad to have had a chance to be part of it, even though until I started actually writing it, I had intended to give it to Jerry Conway or someone to write. I didn't figure any reason for me to write Conan, but I had to because I had offered the estate more money than I had been authorized to. Martin Goodman had authorized me to offer them $150 an issue, which is a lot more money than it is now, but it still wasn't very much. I was that's what we were offering Fongor, the Lynn Carter character we were going to do originally. I was so embarrassed by the amount that when it came to Conan, who I knew was the best of these characters, I read the stuff by then, most of it, and knew that was the most valuable of things. So I didn't think we could get it. It turned out we could, but I was so embarrassed by the $150 that I upped it to $200, which is a 33% increase on my own without thinking about it. Well, when Glenn Lord, the estate agent down in Pasadena, Texas, said, okay, all of a sudden I'm faced with the dilemma. I basically spent $50 more, which is like several hundred or $1,000 or $2,000 now of the company's money per issue without any authorization. So I figured I'd better write the first couple of issues of this comic anyway, in order to, so that if Goodman complains about the money, I can just not voucher a page or two or something, and I'll take the loss. And that's what led me into becoming the Conan writer. Otherwise, I don't even know if I'd have written the comic.
How was life at Marvel juggling so much? communicating with the artists, the other writers, editors, in between people? I mean,
It was very exciting. I mean, not always pleasant. No, what job was ever always pleasant? But it was exciting. Stan was an exciting guy to work for. Sometimes he could be a little manic depressive, but he was basically, excited and mostly positive, the majority of the time. He was supportive. He wasn't a comics fan like, say, I was, but he respected comics people. He respected writing. He respected the artists, so forth. He was enamored of the work of, Joe Maneely in the past, Jack Kirby, Ditko. He thought they were really talented guys. John Romita, John Buscema, Colin. He would sometimes just call somebody in and take a look at, this beautiful page or concept that somebody had turned in. He was very excited by that. He knew that he had some good people working for him. And, that kind of contagion, at least to me, wore off. Some people had a different view. What Marvel was like or what Stan Lee was like in that day, it depends. You'll get 50 different answers, from 50 different people who.
Not more of the people, but more of the environment. How was your day in the life of being at the office, juggling so much all at the same time? Because I've lived a life in corporate world, and I had to juggle quite a bit.
Yeah.
But not to this level of epic.
Just what you'd think. I mean, you're proofreading 1 second, and then they give you something else to do, and something this needs to be done, that needs to be done. And it wasn't something, whether I was at the beginning there or after I'd become editor-in-chief, where I planned out someday I'm going to come in and do this and that. If I did have a plan, it usually didn't last very long after I got there. And you just, combination of either putting out fires or maybe starting some. And but it was kind of exciting. I can't ever say that I felt bored, working at Marvel. Never had any time to be bored. Sometimes I get mad, but never bored. Something was always happening. There was, if something got a little quiet for a little while, something else would explode to make it happen. Somebody would come in with a new idea, or there'd be a problem with the code or something. And it was a nice job, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. I don't know, it's probably good for young people. Stan had a good temperament for it. He sort of gradually gotten used to it. But I enjoyed I was working with some good people. I started out working with Saul Brodsky and, Flo Steinberg, and then Marie Severin was across the way. John Romita came in a couple of weeks later. A couple months later, Bill Everett started up again, and he moved in with me down in Greenwich Village, and because he was only there for the week. So, I was getting a chance to meet all these people that to me had just been like, it was like if you suddenly got a chance to meet, John Wayne or Jimmy Stewart, if you were a movie fan or something like that. That's what it means to meet. What it meant to me to meet Jack Kirby or Stan Lee or Steve Ditko or Bill Everett. I mean, these were,
You had your own personal Comic-Con.
Yeah, even though to the general public these were unknown people, but to me they were heroes. And even later on, when some of them, when somebody would have some problems or something. I mean, you'd say, well, nobody's perfect. Somebody may be not the nicest person in the world, or you may be having trouble with them, but they're still a really good artist. No two people I ever fought much harder than, say, Neil Adams and I, over the years, over this and that, from deadlines and on until not too long before he died, when he was trying to take all the credit for the Kree Skrull War, and but at the same time, I maintained an enormous respect for him, and everything. And I'd work if he came back to life. I'd work with him again. Anyway, I better get going. My wife wanted me to get home.
Oh no! I was
going to say we took more of your time than we should.
Two more questions, real quick one. What was the end of the day like? Did you leave at 5 o'clock, or
Yes.
example?
Thank God Stan was not one of those guys that made you stick around till 5:30 or 6 in the afternoon. He was usually out the door at 5, and the rest of us were out at 5:02 or something like that. 90% of the time. Once in a while there were exceptions, so forth. But if there was a crisis, since there was almost always a crisis, it would still be there in the morning, and there was nothing much you could do at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, so we didn't try.
Roy, it's good to see you. It is really good to see you. Give my regards to Dan, please.
Well, thank you very much. I'll mail off that book to you soon. And congratulations, and thank you very much for doing such a great job printing the Captain Thunder and Blue Bolt. Maybe you can remind people to buy that book.
Buy the book.
That's right.
Go to criticalblast.com, hit that page. I think there should be a link on the YouTube channel right below here. If you're watching it on the Critical Blast channel, you can just clink it. Yeah, you can click the link. It's a new portmanteau now. We clink things. And go out there and buy the book. Buy it from Critical Blast. Buy it from Amazon. Buy it from Walmart. It's out there. All the books we publish are out in the mass market. It's been a super pleasure and a privilege to have Roy on the show tonight. So
Roy had to run. Dan was calling him. Yeah.
Yes. You got to go when the wife calls, and I'm about to experience that myself. So everybody out there. Yeah, I know.
Glad you made it in, George.
It just the day just got away from me. Sorry, guys.
Alrighty.
That's all right.
Good night.
So we're going to leave. We got a 3-minute outro. Don't hang around. Just go, guys. We'll talk later. And Dennis, thanks for setting this up. Folks in the chat, thank you for being here. We don't have a show without you. We're just a podcast falling in the woods otherwise. So we're glad you're here. And, of course, as always, while you're here, we just hope you had a blast. Thanks, guys. Good night.
On the tube and feel the vibe. Every show you crave right here live. Heroes and villains clash in the night. Madness Comic Network sets it right. Scroll through the list, find what you need. Epic battles and fast-paced speed. From capes to cosmic space delight. Tune in and watch your favorites ignite. On Facebook, share the thrill so grand. On X, the buzz across the land. Madness Comic Network all around. In every episode, joy is found. Uploads, they never end. Superheroes and their friends. Catch every twist and every turn. Madness Comic, you will yearn. Stay up to date with every twist. Madness Comic, don't miss a gist. From laughter to tears, every mood. Madness Comic sets the groove. Click that button and subscribe. Catch the wave and ride the tide. Join the fun, join the craze. Madness Comic brightens days. Hey! New uploads, they never end. Superheroes and their friends. Catch every twist and every turn. Madness Comic, you will yearn. Stay up to date with every twist. Madness Comic, don't miss a gist. From laughter to tears, every mood. Madness Comic sets the groove. Click that button and subscribe.